Hello and welcome back to Drop the Act. I'm your host, Chris Key. Today we're doing something a little bit different as I've picked some of my favourite conversations from Season 1 and Season 2. You're going to hear from solo Atlantic rower Annesley Park, Red Arrow's pilot Daniel Lowe, and Performing Perfectly's very own Lucy Key. Stay tuned. In this episode, my guests talk about fear, rejection, imposter syndrome, and what it really looks like to step up, lead, and connect with people. The conversations were honest and raw, and I thought they were so good. Why don't we hear them again? As always, if you like this episode, please subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts. In the meantime, let's have a listen.
Well, I think the first thing is, for me, I needed to learn what the physiological things were that were going on in my body. And as soon as I understood that actually when you hyperventilate, which is when you breathe too much, your body then releases hormones that encourages your body to feel certain things, whether it's heat, whether it's pins and needles in your fingers, whether it's feeling like you can't take a proper breath. So understanding, okay, nothing's going to harm me here. These are just physiological symptoms that actually I can control. And what I've learned with the years of training that I've done and people I've worked with is that being able to take control of your own nervous system is such an important tool that, again, I think, God, I wish I'd known this stuff when I was younger, because I use it now all the time. I bang on and on about breath because it is the one way in which we do have control over our limbic system. So that really deep part of our brain, that fight or flight, it's called the limbic system. The frontal lobe is where we make decisions, but when that is impaired, or telling us difficult or harmful things, then actually our limbic system suddenly goes into overdrive and we can't control ourselves. But actually we can control ourselves. So there's lots of tools that we can do that. And the way we speak to ourselves is one of those. Mindfulness, all the stuff that we know about, but I think possibly don't necessarily use all the time because we're busy and it goes on the back burner. But absolutely, it's something that I'm really passionate about now, and I can see people flourishing, and I think, wow, I wish that I'd had this.
And I know we use breathing techniques as part of Performing Perfectly as the beginning of the process to help calm the nerves as a support for using the voice, and it can be used for so many things, can't it? And it can help. We encourage people just to take that moment, look at their breath, look at their physicality before they step into a room or onto the stage or whatever it might be.
And I think, when you and I learn how to breathe properly, which sounds bonkers, but that is what you start to learn at drama school, because as we're born, when we're babies, we breathe organically in the right way, and then the environments in which we inhabit and the way that we move and stresses that we carry mean that we don't often breathe properly. So relearning that as an 18-year-old was really interesting. But when we learnt it, it was purely really so that we could sing long phrases without taking a breath, for example, because it sounds more impressive. And musicians were taught it as well, especially wind musicians. You don't need it as a drummer. But what's happened over certainly the last decade is that these techniques are now being used in hospitals with COVID patients, with patients that have got COPD or lung damage. It's being used with patients that have got chronic pain conditions. It's being used very much with patients that are struggling with mental health conditions such as anxiety and depression. So these techniques that we use from a very practical point of view are now being used in all sorts of settings and having profound effects. And it's what baffles me is the amount of control that we do have. So I don't know if you watched it with me, that Kate Winslet episode on Graham Norton, where she was doing she was talking about her filming in Avatar, and she had learnt how to hold her breath for over 7 minutes, which is such an incredibly long time.
Well, we were discussing the other day about David Blaine as well, when he did.
Yeah.
Was he in a box of water? I can't remember what he was doing,
Ridiculous.
but held his breath. But so I suppose it just goes to show that you're never too old to learn this and to train the body to be able to use the breath.
Well, yeah, it's just, I think I didn't have any understanding of that I could do that. I had that amount of control. And the thing with breathing is it's the only mechanism in our body that is both voluntary and involuntary. And when you think about that, it's quite incredible. You know, you have no control over anything else. Your heart will beat, your liver will continue to work, your kidneys will clear out your system, but your breath, you go to sleep at night and your body will breathe. But if I want to now, I can stop breathing. And I can choose how I breathe. And what I noticed when I was working with people, especially in roles that meant that they were leaders, but certainly having to inspire people and communicate with people on a regular basis, that sometimes when they were getting stressed or speaking, you could really hear that in their breath, which then becomes quite uncomfortable for us to listen to and uncomfortable for them. And then that would spiral out of control. And they're, so all of these things would happen. And understanding that you can breathe in a way by learning certain techniques. So I'm doing it now, breathing in through my nose, and I'm speaking on the exhale. And then I'm doing it again, so it's slowing me down, but it's meaning that I am not over breathing. So at no point during this conversation will I hyperventilate, which means that I'm not, even if I'm feeling those feelings of nerves, they're not going to come to a point where I start to feel other physical symptoms that are going to prevent me from carrying on.
Is there, whether this will work on a podcast, obviously you can listen to podcasts, but we're also on camera with YouTube. Is there something you could just do as a little exercise? I know you can't stand up, you'll go out of camera shot, but just so people can maybe something, just a little hint or...
Okay, well, a really, really simple exercise. There are a few, but my favourite one is literally just breathing in and out. So if you're listening to this now, just take a moment to notice that when you breathe in, you're breathing down into your diaphragm. So what you don't want to happen is that your shoulders rise up. Actually, if you think about where your lungs are, they're here and they're round your back. So just take a few breaths where you're breathing in.
So in through the nose and out
in
through
the nose and out through the mouth. And just notice. And what you will notice happening is that your stomach will inflate on the in-breath and deflate on the out-breath. It's really important that you breathe in through your nose and out through the mouth. And then we're just going to breathe in for 4 seconds and out for 6. And the reason we do that is because if you exhale for longer than you inhale, you will never hyperventilate. And this is all about control. So it's not about snatching a breath for 4. It's about controlling it in for 4 seconds and controlling it out for 8. Do you want to give it a go?
Yeah, why not?
Here we go. So release any air you've got. We're going to breathe in, go 1, 2, 3, 4, and out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's do it again, but this time when you breathe out, Chris, I want you to pierce your lips so it's almost really audible on the out breath. Okay, so it's really controlling it. So this time we're going to go in for 6 through the nose and out for 8 through the mouth with pierced lips. Here we go. In 1, 2, 3, keep going, 4, 5, 6, and out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Great.
So how can people use that and how will that help in different situations?
Well, straight away, what you are doing is grounding yourself. So you are taking back control of your nervous system. So for one thing it does is it actively slows down your heart rate. So what we know is that when we overbreathe, when we breathe too quickly, our heart then mimics that, so starts to beat quickly. And when our heart beats quickly, we feel breathless. And when we feel breathless, we start to feel hot. And when we so you see what I mean? It's kind of this tumbleweed. So if you did that in the car travelling to a job interview or sitting before you did an audition, if you did that at any point when you could actively feel that you were feeling anxious, then it would help. But the great thing about that particular exercise, which is why I chose it, is that you can, once you've practiced it a few times, you can use that whilst you're speaking as well. So I am doing that now. The only difference is that I am speaking on the out breath.
And I suppose having control of your breath then allows you, when you are speaking, to think about all those other things that will really help your speech, whether it's in front of a large audience or not, become more dynamic. I'm talking about being able to pause, being able to really look at your pace and the tempo and the rhythm of how you speak.
Yeah.
Because if you haven't got control of that breath, then it's really going to have a knock-on effect with all of those things.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I also bang on to people about practice. And what I notice is that the thing that you and I learned at drama school and as professional actors is that you practice and you rehearse constantly and for hours and for days before you actually go and perform. And yet I work with people all the time that will be doing a keynote speech or even just wanting to have a meeting where they're inspiring the leaders that they're working with or their colleagues, and they might prep it a little bit or think about what they're going to have on a screen behind them, that they don't think about what they're going to do themselves. So if you can practice something like breathing and allow it to become a habit that you might do every morning when you're in the shower or after you've cleaned your teeth, and just work it into your day, then absolutely when you are in a situation where you want to think about your voice and tone and how you can influence or engage people, the breathing will just happen and it's one less thing to worry about.
As we mentioned it, I mean, I do want to talk about some of the guests we've had on this season, but as we're talking about the voice and how to use it, you mentioned there just about pitch, and I'd love you to just elaborate a little bit about what is at our disposal that we often don't think about, and how we can use the voice to be able to make our communication far more engaging.
Well, I love the voice. I love the voice. I find it the most incredible tool that we have. I personally think, and this is my view, but as communicators, it's probably the most important thing that we have when we're talking about communicating. Body language we've got and language that we've got, but your voice, I think because it's so personal, isn't it? You think about, I could phone you on a phone that you didn't recognise and just say hi, and you would know it was me. And that's mad, isn't it? When you think of the trillions of people in the world, and yet you could pick out that one sound and you would know it was me. One of my good friends is a motor neurone disease specialist nurse, and lots of her patients will lose their ability to speak, sometimes weeks, but sometimes months before they pass away. And she says that when they lose that's when she sees a real decline in their physical condition as well, because it's like that last piece of dignity, that last piece of ability to communicate. So when you think of it like that, it's such an incredible tool that I think the majority of people completely take for granted, and it really gets on my nerves because I think you've got this wonderful voice. Most people say they don't like it. Most people don't use it properly. Most people don't understand how important it is. So in all the courses that we develop, a huge part of that will be getting people to actually start to like their voices and enjoy listening to it and understand that generally most people have about 3 octaves. An octave is 8 notes. If I had a piano now, I'd show you. But we've got a lot of notes in our voice that we don't use. On average, we use about 5 notes of that a day, which is really boring. So understanding pitch and pause and pace. If I was to talk to you now about the voice in a completely monotone voice, which isn't really using any other notes, and I'm using a very steady pace, as much as it's clear and you completely understand what I'm saying, the chances are you're going to switch off, and so are everybody else listening. So the minute I start to use more of my voice, which I am now, and I add in pause and pitch and tone, then it becomes a completely different way of listening. And we're musicians, but I often think of it musically. If you've got if you think of something like Les Mis, that you're obviously very familiar with, and you think of A Dream to Dream, and somebody sings, and I turn your dream to shame, I'm singing all the right notes in all the right places, and it's reasonably pleasant, but it's boring and it doesn't get you in the heart. And we're going to probably talk about storytelling in a minute, but the voice, it's the dynamics, that's what makes your hair stand on end. So if I then go, and I turn your dream to shame, and still I dream, then that's what makes the audience go, oh my God. It's the dynamic.
I was in the lee of the island at the time, and then around about 5 or 6 miles, I looked over to my left shoulder and I could see these white caps in the distance. I was like, oh God, like this is not okay. I hadn't seen big water like that. You know, you can do coastal rowing and stuff and train for it, but you really only ever, 80% ready. There's always 20% that you're going to learn out on the ocean. And I saw these white caps in the distance, and I was like, oof, the angle that I was going at and the sort of sea state and the wave angle was not in my favor. And with my boat and with any ocean rowing boat, you have a centerboard to try and keep you on a course, as well as your autopilot, which steers your rudder. It's got no sort of like power as such. It just allows the rudder to go from left to right. And everything was on max when I was sort of really deep into the wind at that point. It's probably about 10 miles in. And around about 6 p.m. in the evening, I saw one wave on my left side, and then I was like, wow, this one's going to capsize me. And so it wasn't the one that I saw, but it was the one behind. And so I had to let go of everything and just hold on. And it flipped me violently into the water, and it was freezing cold. But when I flipped over, it was so still and quiet and so calming in that sort of moment that I was under the water. And then I opened up my eyes and I could see the grayness of my decking. And I realized that I was in my worst feared moment, which was to be in the water upside down. And I didn't know whether my boat was going to come back up or rewrite itself. So I pulled on my lifeline. I got to the top of the surface of the water, and I was reminded of this absolute chaos and the battlefield that I was in. And my mind and my body just went into don't think, just do, drive. And I had to let go of everything, allow the boat to rewrite itself. Got back on board. Alarms were going off everywhere. Things were everywhere, but luckily I didn't really lose anything. And I had to really sort of go, I just kicked into autopilot, like make sure my batteries were okay, make sure everything was good on deck, make sure I was okay, and then alert my safety team. So I went into my forward cabin. I switched on my emergency button on my tracker. That kicked everyone into gear. They could then communicate with each other whilst I set up my SATCOMs. Rang my safety team, and they said, you've got two options. You either call it now because you can still see the island, or you carry on. As long as you've got no water ingress and sort of no electrical issues as such that's going to stop you from going all the way, then you've got no excuses. And I said, yeah, there is no way I'm going to be turning back. So had to just sort of get myself back into that mindset and get myself changed. I was freezing cold. I was still being violently seasick at this point. And I just had to refocus, and opening that door after just capsizing was the scariest thing of the whole process, I would say, because you knew that you were going to re-enter and sort of face that threat of capsizing yet again. So I opened the door, and the only way I can describe it is it felt like, when you watch those YouTube videos on the North Atlantic with the big ships and like you can see all these big waves. I looked over again to my left shoulder, and I was just like, I said to myself, this cannot be happening right now. This is crazy. What am I doing? But I got my para anchor out, which is like a big sea anchor that sort of stops you from moving too much. Set that up and chucked it out set myself back up for a bit of a sleep for a few hours just to sort of recuperate and try and get some hydration and food in me. And then around about 2 o'clock in the morning, I pulled it in, rode so hard because there was still huge waves, and it's just pure panic really, and sort of like adrenaline. And then yeah, passed out on deck. And for the next 3 days, I just really don't remember a single thing. It was just pure autopilot emptiness in my brain.
Wow. I mean, how many hours? Sorry, how many hours was this into your journey? When
this was about 10 hours into my 55 days of rowing.
10 hours in, and I suppose I was going to ask you what's the mindset that makes you go, I'm going to keep going, but I suppose that's the mindset you've had all your life. You've got the goal, you've got the target, and you're heading to it, and there's nothing that's going to stop you from doing that.
Yeah, and also I think more so it was the team. I think it was the fact that I had such an incredible team, and they showed me that we had that trust and honesty and vulnerability and communication. And they allowed me to go, they've got my back. And whatever happens out here now, I know that we can face anything. And I think that was the biggest learning point of it all, is that when you've got a tribe around you, you are capable of doing anything, having that support network.
It's a good philosophy for business as well, I think. Go much further when you've got a team around you. Just for people who don't know, I should have asked this earlier. How big is this boat?
So this boat is a 6-meter ocean rowing boat. It's called True Blue, and it's got a lot of history. Unfortunately, last year it was recovered from the Atlantic it was around about 700 miles out. When a lovely guy called Michael Holt unfortunately passed away on it. So he was brought back to Cape Verde. Boat was recovered from Cape Verde back to the UK. It was in a pretty big mess. But, we worked hard to revamp it, get all the things that I needed to be done to it. I worked, again, really hard on it myself as well. And I really wanted to finish that journey that Michael had started. And yeah, he was very much there with me all the way. And I think the most beautiful part of it all was I had this bird that followed me from day one all the way to day end, like the last day. And there was only 2 days that I didn't see this bird, but I'd always see it in the morning and the evening, and you could time it almost perfectly, and you could almost feel it before you would see it. And I'd always say, "Good morning, Michael," or "Good evening, Michael." And it was just those special moments like that made the journey. And there were so many moments like that.
I mean, you might not be able to go into detail with this, but Michael, that's obviously a tragic story. Was it? Are you able to say? Was it him attempting the journey? Did he sadly lose his life because of the journey, the elements involved, or I suppose the point I'm getting at, for you to be then taking on this challenge, knowing what risks there are. I mean, for many people, it made them go, actually, this is too much. But for you, it drove you on.
Yeah, I mean, Michael had diabetes, and he had a complication out there. But I think with any sort of expedition like this, there's always that risk of death and of not surviving. But no, that didn't put me off, having a boat that, somebody had passed away, and it actually spurred me on to go, there's a responsibility here. And I really wanted to take that responsibility on and really have that journey with somebody. And that was with Michael. And, I am in contact with his family, and they were also an amazing part of that process. And I think they got hopefully some peace from it too.
It's remarkable. You mentioned when you capsized that notion of being underwater and actually, I imagine, sort of searching for the surface or for air or whatever it might be, and yet there being a calmness in there. I find that sort of fascinating, that we do hear stories sometimes about drowning, that actually that it's a more of a peaceful way than people imagine. I mean, thank goodness that didn't happen to you, but it's interesting you found that sort of calm in such a chaotic moment?
Yeah, I mean, the only way I can describe it, and I feel like the ocean knew I needed to start my journey like this, and it was the biggest moment and the turning point of my whole journey. And the only way I can describe it is a little bit like when I fell into the water, it was like being back in the womb. And I had to curl up in a sort of fetus anyway, in a fetus pose, only because things were going to hit me on my head whilst I fell into the water. And the only way I could protect my head was to sort of curl up in this ball. But as you go through that process of being in the water and it's calm and it feels really safe, and there's just nothing apart from feeling that sort of safety net. It was like being in the womb, and the sort of my safety line was like the umbilical cord. It was my lifeline. And so then when I pulled on my lifeline and I rose to the surface of the water, it's like a baby taking its first breath. And I felt like this was almost the rejuvenation or the rebirth of who Annesley was going to be or wanted to be.
Give me one more wonderful experience on your journey.
Oh my goodness, it's so hard to pick. But I suppose another one that sort of sticks in my mind was there was this storm that had a tropical storm that had come from the south and was creating these southerly or northerly winds. So coming from the south and pushing up north, and I was already a little bit too far north, and I needed to come down, but I just couldn't fight the elements. So I had to put myself on power anchor for 5 days, and and I found some friends in the ocean, so these mahi mahi, and they would scrape their bodies on the bottom of my hull, and because my hull has anti-foul, it actually attracts the barnacles, and the amount of times I had to jump in the water and scrape them off, it was just so annoying because it slows the boat down. Anyway, I knew that by me being on power anchor for 5 days, it was just going to be an absolute nightmare with trying to get these barnacles off. But as I was about to put myself off power anchor the day before, I put my GoPro in the water, and the hull was immaculate. And it was because these mahi mahi were smacking the bottom of my boat and eating them. And it really felt like, this anchor I was about 400 miles off land by this point, by the way, and it felt like everything was stopping me from trying to get to land and finally finish this mission. But then it just felt like the mahi mahi were the start of this process of going, Annesley, you've learnt so much out here, and now we're going to give you a helping hand. And having the mahi mahi wipe the bottom of my boat and sort of do that for me was amazing. And then being able to pull up the anchor and ride those next 400 miles with such speed. I mean, the weather was with me, the wind was with me, everything was with me. And for those 4 days, I laughed so hard, and I can remember the joys and just celebrating and dancing and the sunsets and the sunrises, and I was so excited to get to land. And then, when I reached the north point of the island, I was told by my weather router, Annesley, you've got a really, really strong north current just on the west part of Barbados, so you need to really kind of keep in as much as you can, but you've also got a coral reef that you need to kind of keep out but also keep in. And as I touched my last waypoint, which is a point in the water that you need to hit, I could see this huge squall in the distance, and this squall is like a big amount of water and wind that sort of hit you quite quickly and violently, and I hit that, and this storm hit me just on that pinnacle point, and I thought, oh, this is going to ruin me. I'm going to have to get towed in, which would then mean my ocean row was not unassisted, and I was so scared because it brings so much wind, and the wind was going easterly, and I was trying to cut down the west side, so it was just trying to push me more and more into this northerly current. But in fact, this rainbow landed on me and the support vessel that was going to come and guide me in found me from this rainbow that landed on me, and it squashed everything. So the big waves and everything that was meant to happen just got squashed, and it just felt like everything was on my side, and it made that last part of the last couple of miles so special. And then hearing my sister's voice, and
Well, I was going to say, talk me through those final moments when you know you've completed this.
oh my goodness me, I still get teary about it now. I knowing that I survived it was the one of the biggest ones. Also, knowing that I was now going to be going into this space of a liminal space, not like now knowing who I was, but also still not knowing who I was going to be, and touching land and seeing people, and also having to face reality, all the things that I'd put off for so long because I wanted to achieve this dream, and this dream was now about to finish. So many emotions, so many thought processes through that, but.
And what have you learned? What did you learn about yourself in that process? I mean, we talk about communication, but you've got no one to communicate with apart from yourself, and obviously the times that you were on the satellite to your team. I mean, what sort of learning is there in that?
I think the biggest thing was to really understand about being in the process, really being in the moment, and the communication that you have with yourself, the self-talk, the visualization, and also the honesty. You can't run away from it out there at all. You don't have time to run away from any of it. You can't escape it. You just have to be brutally honest with yourself, and face your fears. I mean, curiosity, I would say, curiosity will always conquer fear, even more than bravery. And there was a lot of fears that I faced out there that I wanted to be curious about, and I overcame them. And I would say that was my biggest learning curve, is how do you face fear? And it's through curiosity.
It's a remarkable thing that you've done, and I was talking to Lucy about this and just saying, God, I just can't imagine it. Even though there's probably parts of it I'd think, God, that would be amazing. I just can't imagine that I could ever do it. And yet I know that one of your mantras, certainly moving forward, and one thing you want to talk about a lot is limitless possibility, or limitless potential.
Mm-hmm.
And that notion that there are no limits. And that's obviously something you are living your life by. And was that also part of your journey, or your learning through your Atlantic journey, or is this a philosophy that you've had all through your life?
I think my mindset has limited me in many ways. Trying to reach that end goal all the time, that's so limiting. But the process of reaching something that not many people do, and being in extreme environments, you get to learn that actually being in the process, and visualizing what you want to achieve and making those things happen, it allows you to go that anything is possible. No matter what you dream of, whether it seems completely ridiculous, which I would say the more ridiculous it sounds, the more it's going to happen. And the more you kind of chase it to go, I need to know that this is going to happen. It's like an itch that you need to scratch, and you can't sit still until it's done. I think that's the best part of it all, is knowing that you've achieved something that not many people get to achieve.
And how's it affected you now moving forward? What's next for you? How do you compete with that? Are you happy to go, I've done that, and now I'm going to move into a slightly more calmer, sedate life? Or does it just make you go, what's the next challenge?
I mean, definitely. Once you start something like this, it's always about, well, what can we do next? But also I think it's a little bit about, for me especially, is really taking this time to say, actually, I have done something that I'm really, really, for the first time, I'm really, really proud of. And I want to take some time to still land my feet. I mean, it's been about 2 months since I've arrived back on land. And I'm still trying to understand what I've done. it's a little bit like when you lock the door in the morning and you go to work and then you kind of go, did I lock the door? I just need to go back and check it.
Yeah.
I'm still in that space at the moment. And I know that it's because it was such a beautiful yet terrifying experience that I've still not allowed it to sort of land in my body and in my mind. And so I'm writing a huge amount at the moment, just brain dumping and remembering certain moments and talking about it with family and friends to actually go, yeah, it really did happen. And also, yeah, planning a few ideas of what we can do next. And I think my next journey needs to kind of represent where my life has taken me, and it's gone, from the mountains down to the river and then to the ocean. And I think that's where I'd like my next adventure to be. But in the meantime, yeah, I am still trying to work on how I tell my story and how I use my voice instead of using it through action. How do I actually use it through communication? And that's where Lucy has come in to it on a massive scale for me, is being able to understand how to storytell and how to use my voice.
And so how does that transform itself into the life cycle of a Red Arrows pilot? Well, you start out normally at the front of the formation, which is right next to Red 1, because the momentum of movement is much less and the anticipation is much less. So whilst you get to grips with display flying and the aircraft and all the rest of it, you're at the front. And then every season, which is an annual cycle, if you like, you start training in October, November, you start displaying in June, and then you finish, September, October time, and the team starts again. Every season you change position. And the reason we change position is that it's a horrible word, but complacency starts to seep in. And if people have heard me chat before, I talk about this one all the time. It was off Cleethorpes, which is northeast Lincolnshire. It was a twilight display, so it's about 7:30 on a summer's evening. And it was a great show. It was all going to plan. We were doing loops and rolls. The weather was great. There was nothing untoward. And I just remember distinctly being upside down in a roll, thinking, okay, well, it's about 7:30, so we'll be back on the ground at 8. That means I'll probably finish debrief at 8:30. I'll be home for about 9. There's like 2 chicken breasts in the fridge. I'm thinking about what I'm cooking for dinner.
Yeah.
Right? I had to shake your head and go, mate, what are you doing? Get back in here, get back into your space, because you never became comfortable. But, like driving a car I mentioned before, now you get in a car, you don't even think about changing gear. You just do it. Whereas before you were petrified of stalling at a red light with all the cars behind you. Now you're I don't know, wherever your head might be, you're thinking about work, you're thinking about, the conversation you're going to have with your partner when you walk in the door, whatever it might be. That's where you get to with flying. And the horrible thing about that is complacency. And with complacency, sometimes you take your eye off the ball and you become overconfident, and a situation might be forming. You think, yeah, I could deal with that in a second. Whereas before you would have dealt with it earlier. Your anticipation, you're like, oh, I've got more time to deal with this. And when you're operating at high speeds in dynamic environment, it can catch you out fast. So you get move position every year. And that gives you a different challenge. It gives you a different aspect. It gives you a different sense of self-preservation. It gives you everything else that means that the complacency is reset. And so to answer your question, what happens is you start at the front of the formation next to Red 1. Maybe in the second season, you're in the middle of the formation, and in your third season, you're at the back of the formation. And eventually, you fall off the back of the formation. And so a traditional life cycle of a Red Arrows pilot is 3 to 4 years. Some will do a bit longer because maybe the selection process hasn't produced the right people, or someone's injured themselves, so they've had to come back. There's no substitutes, by the way. There's just the 9 pilots. And so, the life cycle is traditionally 3 years. And that is because there's only 3 different places they could put you to challenge you enough before the complacency sets in, and you will slowly become dangerous. And so you get moved out the team before that happens.
This is probably a really stupid question. No substitutes, just the 9. You've got a big formation, big event, but someone is unwell or family members unwell. Is that down? What happens there?
So you go, and you go as an 8, you go as a 7. Anything less than a 7, then it's not worth doing, unless it's I'm talking like a full dynamic display. If it's a fly past, we could bit of smoke and mirrors. We'll make it look symmetrical, and as long as the red arrows turn up looking symmetrical with some smoke, and it's more than 3, normally it would look like the red arrows
Yeah.
normally. But for a display, it's very difficult with less jets to look symmetrical. So you start talking about, right, what we're going to do here. And some shapes won't look that eye-pleasing, but there's a huge, what we call a fallout plan. Because sometimes you'll just be taxiing out to the runway and someone might have something wrong with their aircraft, just like a car. Maybe their oils are running too hot that day, or there's just, maybe some airplanes are like sometimes a little bit like Formula One cars. They're just so finely manufactured that the limits are so fine that you can't accept too much of an error on a temperature or a tolerance, because that would become unsafe. So there are times you'll be on the runway and it might be like me. You'll be like, boss from 9, go ahead 9. Yeah, my engine's running a bit hot. I can't get it cooled down. All right, 9, taxi clear. We're going as an 8. And so you take off, and instantly the team will have to then run through a show as what we call an 8 ship. It's an 8 jet formation. And from that, you have to just instantly react. And this is where flexibility and going back to the credibility of knowing your stuff comes in, because if you're on the right and the guy on the left's gone, normally you would both be smoking. So even though it's second nature to hit the smoke button there, you don't hit the smoke button, because obviously one side will have smoke, the other. It doesn't look pretty, does it? You know what it's like to put on a world-class display. And so it's got to look visually good. That's what we're here for. And so that instantly changes. So we probably go down to 7. I'm not there anymore. They will probably go down to a 7. But the only one is Red One. If Red One is sick, then the show doesn't go. No one else can lead. He's the only person that if doesn't turn up, the show does not go on, and the rest will just make it happen around it. And if it's a long-term injury like a broken bone, then maybe we'll look at maybe if there's still enough time in the training period, we might bring back a former team member, knowing that we could get them up to scratch easily and just use them for that summer. But if it's flu, if it's food poisoning, if it's a partner's gone into labor, they're away for the weekend, we will just get on. There's no one coming in to fill that slot, because you train to such a level that it's not fair to ask someone else to train to that level and then execute to the output we expect. But then it's also you can't share the amount of training time around that more than one person can have that position at any one time.
The complacency thing is such an obvious thing in so many ways. I mean, I immediately went to a West End cast who have a 12-month contract, and you look at somebody in month 8 and think, yeah, they're going through the motions. They're settled.
Yep.
And they've lost that spark, and you have 2 choices at the end of 12 months, either to let them go or to put them somewhere else and actually give them a new challenge because they're worth it and have a different role. And
absolutely.
And I wonder where the business is. I mean, you sit down, you have your job, and that's your job. And I wonder how businesses can think about that and think about complacency and how they can just recharge and give people new thoughts, new challenges.
Absolutely. And it's not even just for you and I, where we've come from, it will be a new role, it'll be a new position, but maybe it's just a pivot within that position. Maybe you give them a different challenge. I know this isn't going to happen, but it's just just hypothetically speaking, maybe you gave your actor a new song halfway through, or a new line, or a new, we're going to do that scene completely differently. Like, oh, okay, 1 second. So it's still going to be impactful. You're still going to be that role. You can say about cast member, but what we've done here, we're just going to change the scene, or we're going to change the set. What is it you can change, maybe without changing their role, that's going to give them a new challenge? That's going to give them I need to think about this. And going back to the example you used, it would be amazing to see someone in month 10, from the moment they get out of bed to the moment they perform, compared to day 1. They probably didn't sleep the night before day 1. I wouldn't have done the night before my first show, all the way through to how do they have breakfast? How do they commute to the theatre? What do they do? How much time did they give themselves before they get there? Month 10, are they walking in straight into makeup or whatever it is? Sorry to be naive in that world, but are they rocking up with minutes to spare? Whereas before they probably turned up, for half. I don't know what it is, but it would be interesting to know where that changes. And if you see that behavioral change in your team or your workforce, what do you do to sharpen them up? Because let's not get it wrong. No one, as I say, there was a passion and a want to be there in the first place. No one has, you haven't come and given that person a job, sat in their lounge. They've looked for, they've either trained in that profession, they've wanted to be that profession. I know this isn't as romantically possible for everyone, but they haven't accidentally ended up there. And so they would have enjoyed the challenge at some point. So how do you keep that challenge fresh? How do you get that performance to elevate again? How do you stop people from coasting? And it's even harder when it's going well. How do you, when you've got your month 10 of a production that's selling out, that everyone is on it, it's clockwork, it's perfect. How do you redesign it and go again? How do you go even higher? Because the saying is, isn't, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, if it ain't broke, how do you break it and make it better? How do you get the buy-in again?
Yeah, and I think it's all culture as well, isn't it? I mean, it sounds like with the Red Arrows, the culture that's involved, not only the mindset, but even that whole cycle, that people know what that cycle is. So much has been thought through and put in place. So has that been changing over the years, or is it historically, this is the Red Arrows, this is what we do, everybody knows that this is going to be the cycle? Or how do the leaders of the Red Arrows keep these people on their toes and keep making sure Complacency, I know you said they move position, but just to make sure people are always at the top of their game?
Mm-hmm. So the innovation within the Red Arrows, which innovation is a word, I guess it keeps it fresh, is that you will never go to the same show every year and see the same show. The shapes will change, the maneuvers will change, the cadence will change. Obviously, team members will change, but the show itself is different. So even in your 3 years of being in the team, not only are you changing formation position, but you're changing shapes, which come with a different. You might never seen that move before. Yeah, and there's like an NFL game plan. They've all got all their different offensive and defensive moves. It's kind of like that. It's 60 years old this year, the team, and they're in their 60th display season. And over these years, there'll be so many different formation positions that each leader would have thought up. And each one is it's quite cool, really. It's kind of like the leader, the red one, is kind of showcasing what they think their team's going to do that year. They design it. There's no one else telling them what they want to see, or there's no higher power saying this is what we're going to do. Red one sits down, looks at his team, looks at the shapes, and works out backwards from 22 minutes how he can link them all up together and make it happen. So it's almost like a showpiece of what they want to express with their team that year. And so that does change. That said, there are things that are traditional that stay the same, but it does keep you on the toes. So, for example, you're walking in the morning. If it was you and me, and I said, if I didn't say good morning to you, you could pick me up on that. So, for example, I walk in, see each other, and I go, "Oh, Chris, sorry, I need to speak to you." And you would then stop me mid-sentence, go, "Good morning, Dan." I go, "Oh, sorry, good morning, Chris." So whenever we saw each other in the morning, sounds a bit weird, but we would all say, "Good morning, Chris. Good morning, Dan." And then we start talking. It was a bit of a funny, but it was the same wherever we went in the world every morning. A minute before any event we had to be at, so a brief, a debrief, something you need to be together as a team. There was one of the pilots was charged with ringing a bell. And in our squadron HQ, we had like a bell for the, like you would get in a pub for last orders. And when I talk to business, I talk about that. When you ring the bell in a pub, what does it mean? Last orders. What does everyone do? They go to the bar to get. So we used to ring the bell, which meant in 1 minute's time, we're all going to be in the same place. What that means is it's an opportunity in 1 minute to excuse yourself from a conversation, to put the phone down, to shut the laptop, whatever you're doing. In 1 minute's time, it's going to be totally undistracted, intense talk. I take away intense. I'm going to get my words are too grand here. What I mean is you're going to clear yourself of distraction and be in the right place at the right time to receive information. That became a bit of a funny, because we might be in a UK embassy in Athens because we'd be invited there for a drink because Red Arrows are there and we've done a fly pass for them, and there'll be a cocktail event or something like that, and we're kind of there to grip and grin, as we used to say, meet all these officials and with a Red Arrow smile and disappear stage door right at the end of it. But even then, if the bus was waiting in the middle of ambassadors, one of the pilots would have to shout "ding-a-ling" 1 minute before, and that was to make sure that everyone would be like, "That's a bit weird. What's going on with that crazy guy in the corner?" But that meant that I could then say to you, "Sorry, Chris, that's me. That's 1 minute before I have to leave." And everyone's like, "Oh, all right." So we still had very traditional. Well, we still have traditional methods to bring us together, to ground us, to make sure that the performance were high. So you couldn't just walk into a brief 2 minutes late. Well, you've just disregarded the bell. That's not an acceptable behavior. We weren't allowed to swear in public. Clearly, we were ambassadors not only for the Air Force, the armed forces, so if we swore in public, we'd put £2 in the swear jar, and you get picked up on that. And what we did was, through these little things, we got fined. I'm talking not by the officially fined, just like you and me. We got fined 1 minute £1 for every minute we're late. You turned up 5 minutes late, that's £5 in the pot. You turned up 5 minutes late for a dinner with your partner, that's £5 each, £10 in the pot. And this pot did end up going to like an end of season dinner, or if we were away and someone was, if something happened, we'd send flowers, or we'd look after other people in the team with this pot of money. But this pot came from fines where we didn't make the grade, where we became complacent, when we were late, when we, swore in public, when we didn't turn up, when we let each other down. And that would go through to the performance, late smokes, early smokes. I didn't move to the right place at the right time. Boss, sorry, I'll take a tenner. And what that meant was that led to a level of self-policing. That meant that, if you and I were just team pilots and the boss wasn't in the room and you swore, I'd be like, oh, mate, that's £1. And or if I swore, I'd be like, oh, sorry, mate, I'll stick £1 in later. It became a thing. And so your behaviors changed, your culture changed. The complacency was put to one side because you couldn't just hide from people. One of the buzzwords or buzz explanations of culture is what you do when no one else is watching. And so we created a culture of high performance, which in itself tried to quash or squash complacency.
How have you people buy into people, don't they? And you've already mentioned 2 chance encounters where people saw something in you and wanted to work with you. How much have you had to think, maybe you haven't at all, you're a charming Liverpudlian, how much have you had to think about your communication style, how you communicate, and how much have you thought about how do we communicate the message of LMA? You mentioned social media, the way of communicating these days has completely shifted and changed as well. But at the end of the day, we do want to hear from a person as well. So I've asked a lot of questions in one ramble, but hopefully you can dissect that.
Well, I think on a personal note, you have to evolve and reflect, and it's a completely different thing. Again, we have lots and lots of staff here at LMA. I had me and my brother in a room, and that was it. It becomes very different, and some of those old habits still creep up on you, and they maybe not fit for purpose now. So you got to be conscious of going, actually, I shouldn't have said that. Actually, we shouldn't have done it that. Actually, we should have did a longer lead in. Maybe we should be a bit more patient, because now that ripple effect is you want 200 people to adapt, but you're still thinking there was only you two in a room, because you forget, oh no, that was 16 years ago. So, you've got to, again, but be honest about that. So I think evolve, grow. I think learn from the team that you bring in as well, of every person in the business I'll try to communicate with at some point about work, about the personal life, and get to understand them a bit more. But actually it isn't one size fits all, and it's not easy, and you don't always get it right, but you got to try. You can't just be it's my way or the highway, so I think it's having an appreciation for everyone, but continue to reflecting on yourself as well.
There's a lot of people who have family businesses. I mean, I work with my wife. You work with your brother. There's pros and cons to that, isn't there? And I suppose you've just acknowledged one yourself.
I've got my brother. I've got my sister. I've got my daughter. There are pros and cons, but I think a lot more pros than cons. You obviously overstep and sometimes overshare and maybe say things in a certain way that you wouldn't maybe say to someone else. However, you also get over things a lot quicker as well. And I think, certainly in the early days when things are really tough and you do need to be, doing 7 days a week, there's not a question about that, So we see it as a strength, not a weakness.
Yeah. And just sticking with communication, how has technology and social media, changed the way that you're now communicating either with your team or with your custom?
Yeah, well, with our custom, obviously, social media for 16, 17, 18-year-olds is huge. But I think even within social media, I think it's people now want authenticity. And I think that is into the team as well as our customers and potential customers. So it's about it. We've got so many stories to tell. We've got 2,500 students. Every one of them has got a story to tell. One person's story may resonate with future customers more than someone else, but ultimately we all look in and go, I could see myself in that person, in that story, in that backstory. That's a bit like me. That's a bit like my brother. That's a bit like my sister. So it's trying to get as many stories you can out there in an authentic way. And again, that has its challenges because there's so many stories to be told. And we also know that, sometimes the attention span of the recipients is pretty short. So you got to tell a story in a pretty short space of time to keep them engaged.
Do you think people are starting to see through the sort of Instagram versus reality thing, and we're sort of going around, not full circle, but as you said, it's more important to get to the heart of the person and hear the message rather than see something that people can go, well, hang on a minute.
Yeah, and there's still a place, and of course you have to have your brand values and all those kind of more corporate identities, shall we say. But in a business sense, you want to hear the stories of the people. You want to hear the curriculum team, the tech team, you want to hear the academic admin, you want to hear their stories and put names to faces. And we do lots of meet the tutors, meet the, sort of life in Liverpool, life in London, lots of events all the time, because it's not just, here's a wonderful prospectus, read that and all your answers you will find. And it's not about that. It's the little nuances and the little, as I say, the quirkiness that is real.
That phrase leadership, I was going to say, what's your leadership style? But I mean, I'd love to know whether there's people that you've looked up to as leaders and seen the way you think it should be done, and also seen the way it shouldn't be done. And how have you taken that and evolved yourself as a leader, and what's important for you as a leader?
Yeah, lots of different people, and there's elements in different people that you go, I like the way they do that, I like the way they do that. I think what's sort of within the creative space, people are normally surprised that you have a level of business understanding. They think you can be creative or you're a business person. I think, and I'm told, that I'm fortunate enough to have developed both, shall we say. So maybe quite unique. But again, that's only because I'm sat in meetings all the time, whether it be on campus, whether it be external partners, stakeholders, and I'm sponging what they're saying, and I'm listening to what they're saying, and again, I'm inquisitive and then I'll go back and on the train, in the car, whatever it may be, reflect on why they've said that. That was interesting what they said, and I'll kind of regurgitate the conversation in my own head, and then soundboard it off to other people. How can we take a snippet of that, and how can that work for what we're trying to do as well? So lots of people, lots of different stories. I think, as I say, ultimately it's about respect and about, having an appreciation for the people that you work with. That to me is what it's about.
Yeah. Are the sort of mentors, is the people that you go to? Have you got people that you can go, I've got a question, I need to go, and there's people you trust you can go and sort of...
Absolutely, yeah. Obviously within, I mentioned Bill and Terry as an example. They've been wonderful mentors whenever I needed to soundboard things off. But there's different levels and different scenarios, so I think people may not know it. Some of the mentors of the team that we've got, they don't know it, but I soundboard off and ask them a question, but it's a loaded question because I'm trying to understand their take on something, or their take on if something was to unravel in 6 months' time, so you sometimes paint scenarios that maybe exist, but just to soundboard, and test the temperature on things.
I love the idea. I was chatting to Ben, who's on a camera somewhere around here, who's on the Ambassadors Programme. That idea of mentorship, but also getting looking after the students once they leave. We know it's a precarious industry. We know it's difficult, but how important was it for you to put these things in place to go, actually, the learning doesn't finish after 3 years. We still want to be able to provide these opportunities for people to improve, people to learn, get better, and help them even more to get into the industry.
Yeah, it's vital, but it was super important for those guys who were going to become ambassadors, and that changes every year, to give them an opportunity to maybe see the other side, shall we say, and build up within the workplace another set of skills. But also, they're the guys who our students can relate to. So again, it's that kind of stepping stone, and for me, it was also another way back into seeing through the eyes of our customers. But our ambassadors are on the the sort of the employee side of the fence as well, you'll have some ideas, some suggestions as well of how we can improve things.
And it's, there's a lot of money involved in business. There's a lot of money, as you said, you're sort of thinking, planning ahead, looking, there's always risks. I mean, how do you manage that sort of mindset, that resilience? What drives you? What keeps you focused? And what makes you, I suppose, take those challenges with a positive mindset?
I think the drive is enjoy what you're doing. That's it, and I think for me personally, I always like to challenge myself. So we obviously started with LMA with in Liverpool. We start with 18 students. We now have 2,500 students. We're in 2 cities along the way, which we've not touched upon. But I then became a shareholder in a wider group called Galileo Global Education Group. So as well as LMA, we have another 71 institutions that we own and operate around the world, and again across the creative space. We now have business schools, we have medical schools. They were, again, different challenges. Yes, we're in the education space, but different challenges. Challenge yourself on a national scale, on an international scale, whether that be culturally, whether that be the terms of reference of legal entities vary on countries. Obviously, financial restrictions can vary in different countries. So for me, it's always about feeling that you're progressing and being challenged, and some days are very challenging. You're human. You have the odd day where you question, wow, am I doing things right here? Is it really? Am I in too deep? Should I have stepped away? Is it above me? And you still drift in and out of imposter syndrome. There's no two ways about that. And I haven't met anyone who's been incredibly successful who wouldn't admit to that, because you've not walked this path before. So, you will feel that, and it's okay to feel that. And going back to those mentors, that's why you need solid people around you, and not just at a professional level, in your own personal life as well. Again, very fortunate on my family life and my partner and my kids and whatever else. They understand it's a big piece of me. So you try not to take things home, but at times you do need a sounding board who aren't involved in the business, but can actually sometimes snap you out or maybe, give you that little loving arm that you need to go back in and go back into battle, should we say.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you would like to get in touch with Performing Perfectly, why not drop me an email? It's chris@performingperfectly.com. See you next time.